"Welcome on board, sir. I hope you enjoy your flight." I said it with my professional smile, the one I'd practiced in the mirror for 10 years. It was polite, distant, and perfectly composed. But as those words left my lips, the man in the charcoal suit stopped dead in his tracks. His boarding pass fluttered from his fingers like a dying bird, landing on the blue carpet of the jet bridge. He didn't pick it up. He couldn't. He just stood there, his face draining of all color, until he looked like a ghost standing in the doorway of my aircraft. Behind him, the woman draped in expensive silk and smelling of too much perfume bumped into his back. "Honey, why are we stopping?" she chirped, her voice like glass breaking. Then she saw me. Her smirk didn't just fade, it curdled. They thought I was nothing. They thought I was a ghost they had exorcised from their perfect, gilded lives 3 years ago. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just a flight attendant today. I was the person holding the keys to their entire future. And we were currently 30,000 feet away from the ground they thought they owned. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" I asked. My voice was a soft, melodic whisper. "You're blocking the line." He stared at my name tag. It didn't have the name he expected. It didn't have the name he had dragged through the mud during our divorce. It simply said, "Chief Purser." He choked out. "You're working here as a waitress in the sky?" The woman beside him, the one he had traded me in for, let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Oh, look at that. From a mansion to a trolley. I guess the alimony didn't last long." Did it? I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I stayed quiet. And that scared them more than if I had screamed. I should have walked away 3 years ago when I first saw the messages. I should have left when I realized he was funneling our joint savings into an offshore account I wasn't supposed to know about. But I didn't. I stayed. I watched. I learned. And when they finally threw me out, with nothing but a suitcase and a reputation he had systematically destroyed in our small, wealthy circle, I didn't cry. I went to work. "Please take your seats in 1A and 1B, I said, leaning in just close enough for him to smell the same vanilla perfume he used to say he loved. "It's going to be a very long flight to London, and I'd hate for any complications to arise with your travel arrangements." He tried to regain his footing, puffing out his chest the way men do when they're terrified but want to look powerful. "I want a different attendant. I'm a diamond member. I pay for excellence, not past mistakes. I'm afraid I'm the highest-ranking officer in this cabin today," I replied, my smile widening just a fraction of an inch. "And on this plane, my word is the only law that matters." As they shuffled past me, him stumbling, her clutching her designer bag as if I might steal it, I felt a cold, sharp spark in my chest. They thought this was a coincidence. They thought I was just a woman who had fallen on hard times, forced to serve them drinks and tuck their blankets. They were so wrong. That's when everything changed. Because as the door of the Boeing 777 hissed shut, sealing us in a pressurized tube over the Atlantic, I reached into my pocket and felt the small, encrypted flash drive. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They thought they had taken everything. They forgot that I was the one who handled the books for his consulting firm for a decade. They forgot that I knew exactly which business trips were actually meetings with people who don't like to be named in tax returns. And today, I wasn't just here to serve champagne. I watched him sit down in first class, his hand shaking as he reached for the seatbelt. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to be the weak woman he remembered. But that woman died the day the locks were changed on my own front door. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever had a moment where someone from your past thought they could still hurt you, only to realize you held all the cards? Before we go any further into what happened during those 6 hours over the ocean, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Whispered Wrongs. Your support helps me tell these stories of justice. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Are you ready to see how a waitress in the sky takes down a titan? Stay tuned, because the cabin pressure is about to drop, and not everyone has an oxygen mask. The hum of the engines always sounds like a secret to me. It's a low, vibrating roar that drowns out the world below. Up here, you're in a vacuum. No one can hear you scream, but more importantly, no one can run away. I stood in the galley, the small metallic kitchen area where we prepare the luxury meals. My hands were steady as I prepped the vintage champagne. I could see them through the gap in the heavy navy curtain. He was agitated, tapping his fingers on the mahogany armrest of his pod. She was reapplying her lipstick, her eyes darting around the cabin like a trapped animal. They were uncomfortable. Good. You see, for 10 years, I was the perfect corporate wife. I hosted the dinners, I smiled at the boring partners, and I stayed home while he built an empire. When he handed me the divorce papers on our anniversary, at a restaurant he owned, no less, he told me I was unskilled labor. He told the judge I was emotionally unstable and had spent his fortune on frivolous things. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted to erase me. He used his connections to make sure no firm in the city would hire me. He whispered in the ears of our friends until my phone stopped ringing. He thought he had buried me in a shallow grave of debt and shame. But he underestimated one thing. My father was a pilot, and my mother was a flight lead. I grew up in the sky. To him, being a flight attendant was a lowly service job. To me, it was a way to move through the world unseen while watching everyone. It was the perfect cover. Is the guest in 1A ready for his beverage? My junior attendant, a sweet girl named Mia, asked as she reached for the tray. "I'll take this one, Mia," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "They're old family friends. I want to make sure they get the special treatment." I walked through the curtain. The first-class cabin was quiet, filled with the soft clicking of laptops and the clink of silverware. I approached seat 1A. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now. "Get me a double scotch," he snapped, "and don't talk to me. I don't know what game you're playing, being here, but I'll have your job by the time we land. I know the CEO of this airline." I leaned down, pretending to adjust his napkin. "I'm sure you do," I whispered, so low the woman in 1B couldn't hear. "But did you tell the CEO about the charity funds you moved into the Cayman account last Tuesday? The one ending in 4492? He froze. His glass rattled against the tray table. How do you know that?" I stayed quiet, and that scared them more, I murmured, echoing the words I'd told myself every night for 3 years. What they didn't know was that while you were busy changing the locks on the house, you forgot I had the cloud password for the office scanner. Every document you thought you shredded? I had a digital copy before the paper even hit the bin. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. "You can't prove anything. Those are just numbers." "It's not just numbers when the numbers match the tail registration of the private jet you used to fly your mistress to the Maldives while I was at my mother's funeral," I said, my smile never wavering. "And it's definitely not just numbers when those same figures appear on a manifest for a shipment that customs is very, very interested in." I stood up straight, my posture perfect. Enjoy your scotch, sir. It's on the house. Consider it a parting gift. I turned to the woman in 1B. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. And for you, ma'am, a mimosa. Or perhaps you'd like to know why your engagement ring is currently listed as a business expense under office supplies in his tax filings. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked back toward the galley, my heels clicking a rhythmic, vengeful beat on the floor. I had been the invisible wife for a decade. Now, I was the only person in the world who could see exactly how his empire was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in. As I reached the galley, I pulled out my phone. We had Wi-Fi on this flight. Powerful, high-speed Wi-Fi. I opened an email draft addressed to a very specific journalist at the Financial Times. I didn't hit send. Not yet. The flight was 8 hours long. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to look at me every time I passed by and wonder if this was the moment his life ended. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stayed for the show. The cabin lights dimmed as we hit the first pocket of rough air over the Atlantic. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed, a sharp, clear sound that echoed through the quiet cabin. For most passengers, it was a minor inconvenience. For the man in 1A, it sounded like a judge's gavel. I watched him from the shadows of the galley. He was nursing that double scotch I'd brought him, but his hand was shaking so violently, the ice cubes sounded like chattering teeth against the glass. He kept looking toward the curtain, waiting for me to reappear. That's the thing about guilt. It turns every shadow into a threat, and every whisper into a confession. Is everything okay, Chief? Mia asked, leaning against the counter. You look focused. Just ensuring our VIPs have everything they need, I replied, my voice steady. Mr. Sterling has a very delicate constitution. He doesn't handle pressure well. He seems like a jerk, Mia whispered, rolling her eyes. He snapped at me because his warm nuts weren't precisely salted. Who even says that? People who think the world is their personal counting house, Mia. They think they can buy silence and saltiness alike. I waited another 20 minutes before I ventured back out. I wanted the silence of the cabin to weigh on him. I wanted the hum of the engines to feel like a countdown. When I finally approached, he was leaning back with his eyes closed, but his jaw was tight. He wasn't sleeping. He was rehearsing. Another drink, sir? I asked softly. He snapped his eyes open. The fear had turned into a desperate, cornered kind of rage. Listen to me, he hissed, leaning forward so his mistress wouldn't hear. I don't know what you think you have, but I have lawyers who will dismantle your life before we even clear customs in London. I'll sue you for harassment, for defamation, for breach of privacy. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cell, not a cabin. I leaned in, my face inches from his. I could smell the expensive scotch and the cheap desperation on his breath. That's where you made your biggest mistake, I whispered. You think I'm still the woman who begged for your attention while you were at late-night meetings. You think I care about a career in an industry you think is beneath you. I pulled a small, laminated card from my pocket, the emergency landing procedures. But tucked behind it was a printed screenshot of a bank transfer. Do you recognize this account number? I asked. His eyes widened. He tried to grab the paper, but I pulled it back with the grace of a matador. That's the account you used to pay off the building inspector 3 years ago, the one who overlooked the structural flaws in the East Side development, I said. The building that's currently being audited by the city. What they didn't know was that the digital trail didn't end at your shell company. It leads directly to your personal vanity account. How did you get into my private server? He stammered, his voice cracking. You gave me the password, honey, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. 7 years ago, our wedding anniversary. You were too lazy to change it. And you were too arrogant to think I was smart enough to remember it. You thought I was nothing but a pretty accessory to your success. You forgot that I was the one who graduated top of my class in forensic accounting before I gave it all up to support your dream. The woman in 1B, his replacement, was watching us now. Her polished facade was cracking. What is she talking about? She demanded, her voice rising in pitch. What building inspector? You told me that development was a gold mine. You told me we were moving into the penthouse. Stay out of this, he barked at her. Oh, don't mind her, I said to him, my tone conversational. She's just realizing that the gold mine is actually a legal sinkhole, and that the penthouse she's dreaming of is currently being used as collateral for a loan you haven't paid in 4 months. I felt a surge of pure electric power. For years, I had been the one humiliated. I had been the one who stood in the kitchen while he belittled my intellect in front of his colleagues. I had been the one who felt the sting of his accidental comments about my age, my clothes, my worth. And then I realized the truth. He didn't belittle me because I was weak. He belittled me because he was terrified of what I could do if I ever looked at him clearly. I should have walked away the night I found the first lie, I said, looking him dead in the eye. But I stayed quiet, and I watched. And now, I'm the one who decides if this plane lands in a world where you're still a billionaire, or a world where you're a fugitive. What do you want? He whispered, his face sagging. Money? I can get you money. Just give me the drive. Give me the files. I don't want your money, I said. And for the first time in years, I felt truly light. I want the one thing you can't buy back. What's that? Justice. I turned to walk away, but I felt a hand snag my wrist. It was the woman in 1B. Her eyes were wide, and for a second, I saw the ghost of my younger self in them. The girl who believed his lies. Is it true? She whispered. Is he broke? I looked at her, then back at him. He looked like a shriveled version of the man I once loved. He's worse than broke, I said. He's exposed. I walked back to the galley, my heart hammering against my ribs. The first 3 chapters of my revenge were written. But the climax was still to come. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And I had the altitude. Now, I just had to decide when to pull the lever. The air in the first-class cabin felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a massive storm. Every time I walked past row 1, I could feel his eyes burning into my back. He was no longer the confident shark who had laughed as he handed me a cardboard box of my belongings 3 years ago. Now, he was a man realizing that the unskilled labor he had discarded was the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried. I spent the next hour in the galley, methodically checking the manifests. Every movement I made was deliberate. I was playing a psychological game now. In a confined space, like an airplane, time stretches. For him, every minute we spent cruising over the dark Atlantic was a minute closer to a reality he couldn't control. He's asking for you again, Mia whispered, ducking into the galley with a worried look. The man in 1A, he looks like he's having a heart attack. He's demanding to speak to the person in charge about a private security matter. Let him wait, I said, polishing a crystal glass until it shone. The more he thinks, the more he panics. And the more he panics, the more mistakes he makes. That's when everything changed. I saw him stand up. He didn't wait for me to come to him. He stumbled toward the galley, ignoring the "Remain seated" sign. He pushed through the curtain, his face a mask of sweating desperation. "Give it to me," he hissed, his voice trembling. "The drive. I know you have it on you. I'll give you $5 million. Right now. I'll wire it to any account you want. Just delete the files." I didn't even look up from the glass I was cleaning. $5 million? That's barely half of what you hid from the IRS last year. You're lowballing me, honey. Old habits die hard, don't they? I'm serious. He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. A tactic that used to work in our living room. You think you're so smart? You're a flight attendant. No one will believe a disgruntled ex-wife with a grudge. I'll say you stole those files. I'll say you're extorting me. I finally looked at him. I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, cold pity. "That's where you made your biggest mistake," I said, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "You think I'm doing this for money. You think I'm like you. Then what do you want?" he cried out, his voice cracking. "I want you to feel what I felt," I whispered. "I want you to feel the floor falling out from under you. I want you to look at the person you trust and realize they were never on your side." I leaned closer, my voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. And as for people believing me, what they didn't know was that I'm not just a disgruntled ex-wife. I've been working with the federal task force for 18 months. I didn't get this job by accident, honey. This airline has a contract with the government for high-security transport. I'm a vetted federal witness with a protective detail waiting at Heathrow. He recoiled, as if I'd slapped him. The blood drained from his face until his lips were blue. You've been talking to them this whole time?" I stayed quiet. "And that scared them more," I said. "Every time you thought I was crying in the guest room after one of your lessons on my incompetence, I was actually uploading your ledger to a secure server. I wasn't mourning our marriage. I was building your cage." He looked back toward the cabin, toward the woman he had replaced me with. She was watching from the edge of the curtain, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't stupid. She knew that if he went down, her lifestyle went down with him. "She's already looking for an exit, you know," I remarked, nodding toward her. "Just like you taught her. Loyalty is for little people, right? That's what you used to tell me." "I'll destroy you," he whispered, but there was no fire in it. It was the plea of a dying man. "You already tried," I said, stepping around him to grab a fresh tray of water. "But you forgot that I'm the one who knows how to fly through turbulence. You're just a passenger." I walked back into the cabin, leaving him standing in the galley, shivering in the cold air. I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't known in years. I should have walked away a long time ago, but the view from up here was worth the wait. The clock was ticking. We were 4 hours from London, 4 hours until the doors opened and the life he had built on lies finally hit the tarmac and shattered. The cabin was silent, but for the man in 1A, it must have felt like a tomb. He had crawled back to his seat, looking 10 years older than when he had boarded. He kept glancing at his watch, then at the Wi-Fi signal on his tablet. He was trying to move money. I could see the frantic movement of his thumbs, the way his jaw was set in a grim, a desperate line. But what they didn't know was that I had already coordinated with the ground crew. The technical glitch he was about to experience with the onboard internet wasn't a glitch at all. "The Wi-Fi, it's down," he croaked as I passed by with a stack of magazines. "I need to make a transfer. It's urgent." "I'm so sorry, sir," I said, my voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Solar flares, perhaps? Or maybe just the weight of all those secrets dragging the signal down. It's a long way to the satellite from here. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. You're enjoying this. You're actually enjoying watching me lose everything. I'm not enjoying your loss, I corrected him softly, leaning over to refresh his water. I'm enjoying my clarity. Do you remember what you said to me the night you packed my bags? You said, "A woman like you is lucky to have been in my orbit. Without me, you'll vanish into the background noise of the world." I paused, letting the memory hang in the pressurized air between us. But that's the thing about background noise, honey. It hears everything. It sees everything. And when it finally speaks, it's the only thing people listen to. The woman in 1B was now pointedly ignoring him. She had put on her oversized designer sunglasses and turned her face toward the window, staring out into the black void of the night sky. She had already calculated his worth and found it wanting. She was a mirror of the shallow world he had built, and seeing her turn her back on him was perhaps the sharpest sting of all. And then I realized the truth, I continued, my voice a mere breath. You didn't choose her because she was better. You chose her because she was easier to lie to. You couldn't handle someone who actually saw you. You needed a trophy that didn't talk back. But trophies don't keep your secrets, do they? They just look for the next mantle to sit on. He slumped back into his seat. The man who had once commanded boardrooms was now reduced to a shivering passenger in a metal tube, unable to control even his own heart rate. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. I whispered the phrase, like a mantra. I walked back to the galley and pulled out a small notebook. I began to write down the exact times of our interactions, his attempts at bribery, and his verbal threats. In the world of high-stakes revenge, documentation is the only weapon that never jams. I should have walked away when the first red flag appeared. I should have left when I saw the first hidden bank statement. But if I had, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't be the one watching the mighty fall from 30,000 feet. The stakes were escalating. He wasn't just losing his money. He was losing his mind. He started talking to himself, a low, frantic mutter about agreements and liquid assets. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own making, and I was the only one with a life jacket, and I had no intention of throwing it. 30 minutes until we begin our initial descent into London. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. I looked at the man in 1A. He looked at me. For a split second, I saw the man I had once loved, buried deep beneath layers of greed and ego. But that man was a fiction I had invented. The reality was sitting in a first-class pod, terrified of the ground. This is where they made their biggest mistake, I thought to myself. They thought I was the one who was trapped. But I'm the only one on this plane who is truly. The cabin lights transitioned to a deep, moody purple as we crossed the threshold of the English Channel. Most of the passengers were tucked under their duvets, lost in the artificial sleep of long-haul travel. But in the first row, the air was vibrating with a different kind of energy. I stood at the back of the cabin, watching the flight path on the small monitor. We were a glowing icon moving steadily toward a destination he was now desperate to avoid. They thought I was nothing, I whispered to the empty galley. I remembered the way his friends used to look through me at cocktail parties, as if I were part of the furniture. I remembered the way he would hand me his coat without looking at my face, already deep in a conversation with someone more important. That's when everything changed, because the furniture had started recording the conversations. I walked up the aisle, my footsteps silenced by the thick carpet. I stopped at 1A. He was staring at the blank screen of his entertainment system, his reflection caught in the dark glass. He looked like a man who had already been convicted. "You know," I said, my voice barely a thread of sound, "the most interesting thing about your consulting firm wasn't the money you took. It was the people you took it from. People who don't go to the police. People who prefer private resolutions." He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "What are you talking about?" "The construction group in the Balkans," I said. "The ones who paid you to grease the wheels for the port project. I didn't just send your files to the authorities. I sent a summary of your recent, shall we say, mismanagement of their funds to their primary contact." He let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "You did what? They'll kill me. You've signed my death warrant." "I should have walked away," I said, leaning over him to collect a stray wrapper. "But I realized that the law is often too slow for men like you. You're good at hiding from judges. You're not so good at hiding from people who don't care about the law. You're a monster," he hissed, his voice trembling with a terror so deep it seemed to rattle his very bones. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm just the woman who cleaned up your messes for 10 years. I'm finally finished with the cleaning." I saw the woman in 1B shift in her seat. She wasn't sleeping either. She was listening to every word, her body rigid. She realized now that she hadn't just hitched her wagon to a falling star. She was tied to a sinking ship. What they didn't know was that I had a second flash drive, I continued, enjoying the way his breath hitched. "The one I gave to the authorities has the financial crimes. The one I kept, that one has the personal stuff. The recordings of you laughing about how easy it was to bribe the council. The videos of you showing off the untraceable assets." I stayed quiet, and that scared them more, I murmured, "because you never knew which day I was recording. You never knew which romantic dinner was actually a deposition." He grabbed the edge of my sleeve, his fingers digging into my skin. "Please, I'll give you anything. The house in the Hamptons, I still have the title in a secondary holding. It's yours. Just tell those people you made a mistake. Tell the authorities the files are faked." I gently unpeeled his fingers from my arm, one by one. "The house you lost in a poker game last month, or the one that's currently being seized by the bank. You're trying to sell me the air I'm already breathing, honey." This is where they made their biggest mistake. They assumed that because I was kind, I was weak. They assumed that because I loved him once, I would protect him forever. But love, when it's betrayed and buried under years of humiliation, it turns into something much more durable than affection. It turns into a cold, calculated sense of duty, a duty to see the truth win. "We'll be landing soon," I said, checking my watch. "I suggest you straighten your tie. You'd hate to look disheveled for the welcoming committee." I walked away, leaving him in a state of total collapse. I could see the sweat soaking through his expensive shirt. The power reversal was complete. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was a terrified man in a middle seat of his own making, waiting for the ground to rise up and meet him. And I had never felt more at home in the sky. The cabin altitude began to change, a subtle pressure against the eardrums that signaled the beginning of the end. Outside the thick acrylic windows, the distant and shimmering grid of London began to pierce through the heavy Atlantic fog. It looked like a jewelry box spilled across black velvet. To anyone else, it was a beautiful homecoming. To the man in 1A, it was the mouth of a trap. I walked through the cabin one last time for the final safety check. My back was straight, my movements fluid. I felt a strange sense of peace, the kind that only comes when a long, grueling journey is finally reaching its destination. "Sir, please bring your seat to the upright position," I said, my voice projecting just enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. He didn't move. He was staring at his own hands, which were interlaced so tightly his knuckles were white as bone. He looked small. It was a revelation, really, how much of his power had been an illusion created by my own silence. Now that I was speaking, he was shrinking before my eyes. "Sir?" I repeated, a bit firmer. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flash of the old him, the predator. "You think you've won," he whispered, a jagged edge to his voice. "But you're still a nobody. You'll land. You'll give your little papers to the police. And then what? You'll go back to your lonely apartment and your miserable little life, while my lawyers spend the next decade turning this into a circus. I'll be out on bail before you've even finished your shift." I leaned down, pretending to check the latch on his tray table. "That's when everything changed," I whispered. "You see, you're thinking about the legal system. I'm thinking about the social one. What they didn't know was that I didn't just send those files to the authorities and your Balkan partners. I sent a very special BCC to every person on your contact list." His eyes went wide. "You what?" "The country club board, your mother, your investors, even the headmaster of the school you're trying to get your nephew into," I said, a cold, bright spark of triumph in my eyes. "By the time your phone catches a signal on the tarmac, your reputation will be a smoking crater. They're not just reading about your accounting errors. They're reading the transcripts of how you talked about them behind their backs. They're seeing the pictures of the charity gala funds being spent on your mistress's plastic surgery." The woman in 1B suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her face as she checked her own phone. The Wi-Fi must have flickered back to life for a second. She looked at him with a mixture of horror and pure, unadulterated disgust. "You told me that money was from your inheritance," she hissed, her voice rising. "You told me you were a self-made man. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more," I told him, ignoring her outburst. "Because while you were busy being self-made, I was the one making sure the foundation didn't crumble. Now that I've stepped away, the whole house is coming down, and I'm the only one with a front row seat." I stood up and moved to 1B. "Ma'am, please ensure your carry-on is pushed completely under the seat in front of you. We wouldn't want anything tripping you up on your way out." She glared at me, but she complied. She was already leaning away from him, physically distancing herself from the wreckage of his life. I headed back to my jump seat and buckled in. The landing gear lowered with a heavy, mechanical thud that vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like the ticking of a clock. I looked out the window as the clouds parted to reveal the runway lights, a long, golden path leading to the moment of impact. I should have walked away years ago. I should have left when he first made me feel small. But as I felt the wheels touch the ground with a soft chirp of rubber, I knew I had timed it perfectly. If I had left back then, he would have found another victim. He would have kept his secrets. He would have stayed a king. But today, he was just a man on a plane, and the world was waiting for him to step off. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They forgot that the person who serves you is the person who sees you most clearly. And once you've been seen, truly seen, you can never hide again. The plane slowed, the engines roaring in reverse, a final, defiant scream of wind and power. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the feeling of the earth beneath us. The flight was over, but the story was just getting to the good part. The fasten seatbelt sign extinguished with a final, crisp ding. Usually, this is the moment of chaos. The sound of 100 seatbelts unclicking at once. The frantic scramble for overhead bins. The impatient shuffle of people desperate to escape the metal tube. But in first class, there was a heavy, suffocating silence. The man in 1A didn't move. He sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. He knew that the moment he stepped through that cabin door, the world he had carefully constructed would vanish. I stood at the exit, my hands clasped in front of me, my uniform impeccable. My heart was a steady drumbeat of satisfaction. This was the moment I had rehearsed in my mind through 1,000 sleepless nights. "Thank you for flying with us," I said to the passengers as they began to filter out. I smiled at a businessman, nodded to a young couple, and helped an elderly lady with her coat. I was the picture of professional grace. Then came the woman from 1B. She didn't even look at the man she had arrived with. She clutched her designer bag like a shield and hurried past me, her eyes red-rimmed. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I whispered as she passed. She flinched, but she didn't stop. She was running toward a future that no longer included a billionaire's favor. Finally, he stood up. He moved like an old man, his shoulders hunched, his expensive suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big. He reached the door and stopped, looking at me. For the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, only a hollow, echoing void. "You really did it," he rasped. "You destroyed it all." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied, my voice as calm as a morning sky. "I simply turned on the lights. You're the one who built a house out of shadows." I leaned in, one last time, ensuring no one else could hear. "Look to your left when you exit the jet bridge. There are 2 men in dark suits. They aren't here for your autograph. And look to your right. There's a woman with a camera from the very newspaper you used to pay for puff pieces. I made sure she got a tip-off about your clandestine arrival." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Why? Why go to this much trouble?" "Because you thought I was nothing," I said. "And I wanted you to see exactly what nothing can do when it's pushed too far." He stepped out onto the jet bridge, and I watched him go. I saw the moment the officers stepped forward. I saw the flash of the camera. I saw the man who had humiliated me for a decade finally being led away, his hands hidden under his jacket, his head bowed in a shame he could no longer hide. And then I realized the truth. The revenge wasn't the best part. The best part was the weight leaving my own chest. I wasn't the discarded wife anymore. I wasn't the unskilled laborer. I was a woman who had taken the wreckage of her life and built a masterpiece of justice. I walked back into the empty cabin. The silence was beautiful. I looked at the pod in 1A, the empty glass, the crumpled napkin, the ghost of a man who no longer mattered. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. But now I don't have to be quiet anymore. I am free. They say that living well is the best revenge. But I disagree. I think the best revenge is making sure the person who tried to break you has to watch you succeed while they face the consequences of their own choices. He thought he could bury me, but he forgot I was a seed. To anyone out there feeling invisible, feeling disrespected, or feeling like you've lost everything to someone who doesn't deserve your light, stay patient, stay observant. Your time in the sky is coming. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to Whispered Wrongs. It helps me bring more of these stories to life. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have hit send sooner? Or would you have waited for the landing? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're looking for another story of a powerful comeback, click the video on your screen right now. You won't want to miss what happened to the woman who was left at the altar and decided to buy the groom's company. Safe travels wherever you're headed. The cabin is now clear.